Look at her limp. Bet she's never even been on a plane. The rich man laughed, loud enough for the whole row to hear. Emily kept her head down. Her leg still hurt from an old injury. No one knew years ago she flew fighter jets faster than the speed of sound. Now she was just a simple woman on her first flight in years. The man kept mocking her, calling her weak and slow. Passengers stared. No one spoke up. But then, halfway through the flight, someone recognized her. And what happened next? Shut the whole plane down. The sun shone brightly on Arlington National Cemetery. Rows of white tombstones stood silent and straight. Today was a big day. A famous Navy Admiral, Jonathan Pierce, was being buried. Many important people were there. News reporters with cameras stood near the gates. Soldiers in crisp uniforms marched slowly, their faces serious. The air felt heavy and quiet, even with all the people. Security was very tight. Only people with special passes could enter. A city bus wheezed to a stop a little way down the road. Elena Ramirez stepped off. She was 27 years old, with kind eyes and dark hair pulled back simply. She wore a plain dress, the best one she owned. In her hands she held a small bunch of blue flowers. They were forget-me-nots, tiny and sweet. Elena walked towards the main gate of the cemetery. Her heart felt a little nervous, but she walked with quiet steps. She reached the gate where a young security guard stood, his arms crossed. He looked important in his uniform. "Good morning," Elena said softly. "I'm here for Admiral Pierce's funeral." The guard looked her up and down. He didn't smile. "This is a restricted area, ma'am," he said, his voice flat. "Military funeral. You need clearance to enter. Are you on the guest list?" Elena shook her head gently. "No, I don't think so. But I knew the Admiral." "No clearance, no entry," the guard repeated, already looking past her. "Please step aside." Elena's shoulders drooped just a little. She didn't argue. She just nodded and stepped away from the gate. She found a spot near the high stone wall that ran around the cemetery. From there, she could only see the tops of the trees inside and hear the faint sounds of a brass band starting to play. She clutched her small bouquet of forget-me-nots a little tighter. Some of the people waiting outside, who also couldn't get in, looked at her. A few whispered to each other, their eyes judging her simple dress and the cheap flowers. One woman nearby said to her friend, loud enough for Elena to hear, "Why is it here? She doesn't look like she belongs." Elena pretended not to hear. She just stood by the wall, her eyes fixed on the distant sound of the ceremony, her face calm and patient. She would wait. That's all she could do. If you're moved by stories like this about quiet people and big hearts, please subscribe to our channel. We'd love to share more with you. Inside the cemetery, the ceremony for Admiral Pierce began. Flags waved slowly in the breeze. High-ranking military officers, with chests full of medals, stood in perfect rows. Government officials with serious faces sat in special seats. The sounds of formal speeches and prayers drifted over the green lawns. It was a grand and solemn affair, fit for a hero. Outside, Elena Ramirez remained by the stone wall. The sun climbed higher, making the day warmer. She didn't try to peek through the gates or complain to anyone. She just stood there, a small, still figure against the vastness of Arlington. Her quiet dignity was like a shield. The forget-me-nots in her hand were starting to wilt a little in the heat, but she held them carefully. She was lost in her own memories of the Admiral, a time when he wasn't a famous hero to the world, but just a sad man who needed a friend. Lieutenant Colonel Mason Carter, an officer helping to manage the proceedings, was walking near the edge of the main gathering. His job was to make sure everything ran smoothly. As he glanced towards the outer perimeter, his eyes fell on Elena. He frowned slightly, a flicker of confusion on his face. There was something about her standing so patiently. He felt like he'd seen her before, or maybe heard about her. Not far from him, a group of 6 men stood a little apart from the other mourners. They were older now, their faces etched by sun and hard experiences, but they stood tall and proud. These were SEAL veterans, men who had served under Admiral Pierce on dangerous missions. They were his brothers in arms. Their eyes too had found Elena. One of them, a man with a weathered face and piercing blue eyes, nudged the man next to him. He whispered, "Look, she's here." Another SEAL, his voice low and rough, nodded. "She made it." A third one added, his gaze fixed on Elena with deep respect. "She saved him, you know. Back when no one else would even look his way. She brought him back from the dark." The other SEALs nodded in agreement. They knew the story. They knew what Elena meant to the Admiral, and what the Admiral meant to them. Loyalty ran deep. The 6 SEAL veterans looked at each other. No words were spoken, but a silent message passed between them. They had all seen Elena standing alone outside the gates. They had heard the whispers about her. They knew who she was, and what she had done for Admiral Pierce. Their leader, a man named Marcus, gave a small, almost invisible nod. That was all it took. The funeral ceremony reached a natural pause. A chaplain had just finished speaking. The next part was to be the main eulogy, delivered by a top general. The air was thick with anticipation and sorrow. In that moment of quiet, the 6 SEALs moved. Without a word to any official, without asking for permission, they all took a deep breath. Then as one they stood up straighter. They carefully pulled off their white dress gloves, folding them and tucking them away. Their movements were precise, economical, born of long training. Then they began to walk. They didn't walk towards the casket or the speaker's podium. Instead, they turned and walked away from the main ceremony, out of their formation. They walked with purpose, their footsteps steady on the grass, heading directly towards the main gate. A murmur rippled through the crowd of high-ranking officers and dignitaries. Heads turned. People whispered, confused. What was happening? Who were these men and where were they going? This was not part of the official program. Media cameras, which had been focused on the flag-draped casket, quickly swiveled. Camera shutters clicked. The reporters sensed a story, something unusual unfolding at this highly controlled event. The solemn atmosphere was broken by a current of surprise and curiosity. The SEALs ignored the attention. Their focus was on the gate and the woman waiting there. Where are you watching this story from today? We'd love to hear from you in the comments below. The 6 SEALs reached the main gate. The young security guard who had turned Elena away earlier watched them approach, his eyes wide. He looked nervous now, unsure what to do. These were not ordinary soldiers. Elena, still standing by the wall, saw them coming. Her heart gave a little jump. She didn't understand what was happening. Were they coming to tell her to leave for good? The lead SEAL, Marcus, stopped directly in front of her. His face was serious, but his eyes were kind. He looked at Elena, then at the small, wilting bouquet of forget-me-nots in her hand. Then he did something that stunned everyone who was watching. He raised his hand in a sharp, perfect salute. Not to a fellow officer, but to Elena, the simple cafe waitress. "Ma'am," Marcus said, his voice clear and strong, carrying in the sudden hush. "We've been waiting for you." Elena's eyes filled with tears. She could only stare, her lips parted in surprise. For me," she whispered. "Yes, ma'am," another SEAL confirmed gently. Marcus continued. "The Admiral left specific instructions. He said if you came, you were to lead him home. It was his wish." Elena gasped softly, a hand flying to her mouth. She looked from one SEAL to another, their faces full of respect. These brave men, heroes themselves, were looking at her with such kindness. "Please, ma'am," Marcus said, offering his arm. "Will you allow us to escort you?" Elena, speechless and overcome with emotion, could only nod. Tears streamed down her face now, but they were not tears of sadness. The seals formed a small honor guard around her, 2 in front, 2 beside her, 2 behind. Together they turned and walked through the now open gates. The young security guard scrambled to push the gates wider, his face pale. The entire crowd inside the cemetery watched in stunned silence. High-ranking generals, admirals, politicians. They all stared as this unknown young woman, dressed so simply, was escorted into the heart of the funeral by 6 of the Navy's most elite warriors. The whispers died down. The sneers were gone. In their place was a growing sense of awe and wonder. Who was this woman? And what had she meant to the great Admiral Pierce? 3 years earlier, the small, cozy cafe where Elena worked wasn't far from the naval base. It was a cheerful place, usually filled with the chatter of customers and the smell of coffee and fresh pastries. One cold afternoon, a man had walked in. He was older, his shoulders slumped, his eyes holding a deep, distant sadness. He sat alone in a corner booth, staring out the window, barely touching the coffee he ordered. This was Jonathan Pierce, not yet the famous admiral everyone would later mourn, but a man recently retired, back from his last deployment. He was a broken man, haunted by what he'd seen and done, fighting a silent battle with PTSD. He felt forgotten. Some days the darkness was so heavy, he thought about ending it all. Elena was new at the cafe then. She noticed him. She saw the pain he tried to hide. Other staff left him alone, thinking he wanted solitude. But Elena felt a pull to reach out. One day, she brought him his coffee and a small cookie on the house. "You look like you could use a little sweetness today," she'd said with a gentle smile. He'd looked up surprised. For the first time in weeks, a flicker of something other than despair crossed his face. From then on, Elena made a point to talk to him just for a few minutes each day. She didn't ask about the war or his past. She talked about simple things. The weather, a funny story about her cat, a new recipe she wanted to try. She served him personally, always with a kind word and that same gentle smile. She treated him not as a forgotten hero or a broken soldier, but simply as a person. Slowly, very slowly, Jonathan Pierce began to heal. He started to talk back, first in short sentences, then in longer conversations. He told her about his late wife, how much he missed her. He mentioned her favorite flowers were forget-me-nots. Elena listened. She didn't offer advice or solutions. She just offered her presence, her quiet kindness. He later told his closest friends, the SEALs who had served with him, that Elena Ramirez had saved his life. "She was the light when all I saw was darkness," he'd said. "She reminded me there was still good in the world, and in me." Before he passed away, Admiral Pierce had written a letter, left with his most trusted SEAL, Marcus. It contained his final wishes. One of those wishes was clear. "If Elena Ramirez comes to my farewell," he had written, "she is to be treated with the highest honor. She walked with me through my darkest valley. It is only right that she walks with me one last time as I go home." And so Elena Ramirez, the quiet cafe waitress, walked. She walked down the central aisle of Arlington National Cemetery, the place reserved for heroes. On one side of her was Marcus, the SEAL leader. On her other side, another of the Admiral's loyal men. The other 4 SEALs walked behind them, a protective escort. As they moved forward, something remarkable happened. One by one, the officers and civilians lining the aisle began to rise to their feet. Generals with stars on their shoulders, admirals in their decorated uniforms, senators and government officials. They all stood. It wasn't a command or part of the protocol. It was a spontaneous wave of respect. The clicking of cameras stopped. Phones that had been out to capture the ceremony were lowered. No one took photos of this moment. It felt too private, too sacred. There was only a profound, respectful silence, broken only by the soft sound of their footsteps on the path. Elena clutched her small bouquet of forget-me-nots. In her other hand she held a small worn piece of paper. It was a short poem the Admiral's late wife had loved. A poem the Admiral had once shared with Elena during one of their quiet talks at the cafe. He had given her a handwritten copy of it. They reached the flag-draped casket. The honor guard standing beside it stepped back slightly, allowing them to approach. With tears now flowing freely, Elena gently placed her small bouquet of forget-me-nots on the polished wood. Then she carefully unfolded the worn piece of paper and laid it beside the flowers. A final connection. Final goodbye. She stood there for a moment, her head bowed. The 6 seals stood silently with her, sharing her grief and her tribute. The entire assembly watched, their hearts moved by this powerful unspoken story of kindness and loyalty that had just unfolded before their eyes. It was clear to everyone now. This woman, though not in uniform, not a dignitary, was deeply important. She had earned her place here. The formal ceremony concluded. The last volley of rifle shots echoed in the air, and the sound of a lone bugler playing taps faded into the trees. People began to move, speaking in hushed tones, the emotional weight of the day settling upon them. Elena stood a little apart, watching as the honor guard carefully prepared to move the Admiral's casket. She felt a mix of sadness and a strange quiet peace. Marcus, the SEAL leader, approached her. The other 5 SEALs stood respectfully nearby. "Ma'am," Marcus said softly, "the Admiral left one more thing for you." He held out a sealed envelope. "He asked me to give this to you personally after everything." Elena took the envelope with a trembling hand. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She found a quiet bench under a large oak tree, away from the departing crowd, and carefully opened the letter. The handwriting was the Admiral's, a little shaky but clear. It wasn't a long letter. It read, "My dearest Elena, if you are reading this, it means you came. Thank you. Your presence is the final gift. Years ago, when I was lost in the shadows, you were the one who showed me kindness without asking for anything in return. You didn't see a broken soldier. You saw a human being. You reminded me what life was worth fighting for. Even when the battles were inside my own head, you helped me find my way back. I will never forget that. Live well, Elena. Keep that kind heart of yours shining. With deepest gratitude, Jonathan Pierce." Tears welled in Elena's eyes again as she read his words. She folded the letter carefully and held it to her chest. She sat there for a long time just thinking as the cemetery slowly emptied. From a distance she saw General Price, one of the highest-ranking officers who had been at the ceremony, walking with the 6 SEALs. As they passed, General Price caught her eye. He gave her a slow, respectful nod. The SEALs, each in turn, also nodded to her. No words were needed. They understood. She understood. It was a silent acknowledgement of shared respect, and a bond that transcended rank and circumstance. Elena offered a small, watery smile in return. She felt a sense of closure, a quiet healing. The Admiral was at peace, and in a small way so was she. Months passed. The sharp grief of Admiral Pierce's funeral softened into gentle memory. The story of the unknown woman and the 6 SEALs became a quiet legend, whispered in military circles and among those who had witnessed it. Inspired by Elena's quiet kindness and the Admiral's gratitude, a small scholarship fund was started. It wasn't widely publicized, but it was there, created by the Admiral's former SEAL team and some of his closest colleagues. It was named the Pierce Ramirez Beacon Fund, designed to help young people who showed extraordinary kindness and community spirit, especially those who supported veterans. It was a small way to ensure the Admiral's legacy and Elena's quiet impact lived on. Elena never sought any attention. She went back to her life working at the cafe, her days filled with the simple rhythms of work and home. She was still the same quiet, kind person, but something inside her felt stronger, more settled. One cool autumn afternoon, Elena found herself back at Arlington. The crowds were gone. The cemetery was peaceful, bathed in the soft golden light of the season. She walked slowly through the rows of white headstones until she reached Admiral Pierce's final resting place. She carried a single fresh forget-me-not flower. She knelt and gently placed it on the stone. She stayed there for a few moments in quiet reflection, a silent promise to always remember. Then with a small, peaceful sigh, she stood and walked away, the autumn leaves crunching softly under her feet. Her simple act of kindness had rippled out further than she could ever have imagined, a testament to the fact that quiet people and true bonds often matter more than anything else. If you want more underdog stories like this, stories that lift the heart and show the best of human spirit, check out the playlist we've linked for you in the comments below. We think you'll find something special there.